Since the dawn of time, the inexplicable has lurked all around us. Stories of cursed objects, creatures lost between myth and reality, ancient villages disappear from time travelers, or legends so old that we don't know if they were ever lies. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 10 stories, 10 dark, strange, scary tales. They are all real or almost real, but I warn you, some of these mysteries have never been explained, and maybe some never should be. Get ready, you are about to plunge into darkness. The Great Grimoire. Some call it the Red Dragon, others the Satan's Gospel. Forbidden, hidden for centuries, and reputed to harbor unimaginable power. It is said to have been written by a figure as obscure as it is terrifying, honorable of thieves, a man who said, "We would have made a pact with the devil himself." He writes under his dictation. Opening this grimoire, it is skimmed long, because these pages would contain the precise instructions to invoke demons. The Grand Grimoire is generally located in the 16th century, but it is in the heart of the 18th. In full grimoire fever in France, that a version would have been rewritten. It was published in the following century. As for the original, or what remains of it, it is believed to be sleeping today in the secret archives of the Vatican. Far from sight, far from hands, the very term grimoire intrigues its fuzzy origin. But most agree that it directs from Old French grammar, for formerly this word designated simply. One yells, "Some books should never be opened." Considered one of the most powerful grimoires ever created, the Grand Grimoire fascinates as much as it frightens. Some believe it was written in 1520 before being exhumed much later in a tomb called Solomon's Tomb in 1750. It is also said that these pages would be engraved not in Latin, but in forgotten languages, Biblical Hebrew or Aramaic. A detail that reinforces the myth. For if this book is related to King Solomon himself, then his power could be very real. The Great Grimoire would be divided into 4 parts, and would still rest today, according to rumor, in the secret archives of the Vatican. A chilling paradox. 1. Diabolical, hidden. At the heart of the church, it is said that its author, Honorius of Tarbes, was not only inspired but possessed. Under the influence of the devil, he would have slept on the scroll of unholy incantations, of forbidden rituals. But the most disturbing thing remains elsewhere. The grimoire would tell in its pages how the new pope would gradually be corrupted, not by men, by Satan himself. But the most terrifying thing about the Great Grimoire are the instructions that lock them in. For this forbidden book would explain step by step how to invoke Lucifer himself or his emissary, Lucifige Rofoco. But calling the devil is only part of the ritual. To hope to control it, one would have to equip oneself with a precise object. The blasting rod, a cult one designed not to summon but to force Lucifer to obey. Once Lucifer is summoned, comes the most dangerous step, the pact. The Great Grimoire then details what he calls the true sanctum ringnum, the authentic method of sealing a deal with the devil. But before we talk, we need to protect ourselves. The ritual requires specific objects: a dematilla stone, 2 consecrated seats, and a basta triangle. a secret symbol traced on the ground to only bulwark against the entities we are about to call. Because outside this circle, no one is safe if the original or its copy lies in the depths of the Vatican. A much more accessible version appeared in the 18th century. At that time, France was invaded by cheap grimoires sold under the chin, and among them, a new iteration of the Grand Grimoire, £1 cursed, reproduced on the chain as if evil suddenly wanted to change hands. This version of the Grand Grimoire spread in the 19th century far beyond the French borders she traveled. Even in the colonies, and even today, its influence continues in the former French territories of the Caribbean, in Haiti in particular. This forbidden book goes by another name, the True Red Dragon. There it is not a vestige of the past, it is still used, still recited, and still feared. In the heart of Wisconsin, there was once a small town named Ovland, an ordinary village, until the day the impossible happened. In the 90s, the Ovland disappeared. Literally, but not a simple fire evacuation, not a disaster. No, it's an entire city, its houses, its streets, its inhabitants that have vanished. Erase without leaving the slightest trace something insane. And yet, here is the very real story of Doffland, the town that one day ceased to exist. Every city keeps archives, the names of elected officials, deeds of ownership, births, deaths. Everything is recorded. And in the United States, each state has its own official archives. Thousands of documents tracing the history of every city, even the most insignificant. Nothing escapes this administrative memory, not even absurd details like the first stop sign stolen by a thrill-seeking grandmother. Every town leaves a trace, except Dobland. In theory, finding traces of Dobland should be child's play from the archives of its audience. Every town is listed in the censuses. The cadastral plans, the death registers. No need for special request, no need for special authorization, but of Ovlandi. She remains nowhere to be found, as if she had never existed. What makes Ovland so disturbing is the total absence of traces. No record, no act of name change, no change of area on any map of Wisconsin. Not a single point scored by Doflandi. Officially, this city never existed, and yet people remember it. Some swear they grew up there. Others claim to have visited relatives there, and even stranger. Some possess physical souvenirs, t-shirts, postcards, objects marked with the name of a city that no one finds. How could an entire city and its inhabitants have vanished overnight? How could houses, roads, schools have been erased not only from the landscape, but also from official memories? What could have swallowed Devolanti, and why is no one talking about it? Here we are facing a city that we remember but that officially never existed. So, how do you explain the inexplicable? The first theory is a natural disaster. Some argue that an earthquake struck D. Ovland and that a gigantic chasm engulfed the entire city, devouring it in silence. But if that were the case, why is there no report, no newspaper article? Nothing fair. Empty it. Someone would have noticed something, right? Another theory circulates, however. What if D. Offland had been drowned? But literally. In Wisconsin, more than 900 dams have been built over the centuries. Some gave way, others were abandoned or destroyed. Entire cities almost disappeared beneath the waves, so Offland was swallowed up by a flood. erased by a flood so violent it would have swept away even his memory. But even then, why is there no record of its destruction? A third theory, even darker, suggests that Douglas was destroyed not by a natural disaster, but by a military experiment gone wrong. A city wiped off the map after a project classified as defense secret. An idea worthy of a movie, but some believe it. A variant of this hypothesis tells that Dublin would have been a temporary military town at a camp set up the time of an operation, then dismantled. But then why do so many witnesses speak of a normal city, with families, shops, souvenirs? It doesn't fit. Finally, the most rational theory, that of the economic collapse of Ovland, would have been deserted. Its departed inhabitants sought a better life elsewhere, like so many other ghost towns scattered across the United States. But here again, one detail disturbs. When a city dies, it leaves ruins, abandoned roads, ruined buildings of Ovland. It left nothing. The sixth theory, as absurd as it is frightening, offers a more radical explanation. What if Deflon still existed, but was simply invisible? Some evoke a technological cover-up. Others something more disturbing. Aliens, as astonishing as it may sound. The hypothesis of non-human intervention is not systematically linked to the Offland case, but by reflecting on a civilization with sufficiently advanced technology, could it erase an entire city, tear it from our reality without leaving the slightest trace or noise? And more importantly, why Offland? So we have 6 theories, maybe 7 if we believe. To the aliens, so many attempts to explain the inexplicable, but in reality, they can all be dismantled. No earthquake, no matter how powerful, could have wiped out an entire city without leaving traces in the ground and in the archives. Nor could a flood, a dam, or an economic collapse have erased every material and administrative trace of Dovilante's existence then. What is the real explanation? Or worse, is there an explanation? There are no seismic faults in Wisconsin. In other words, an earthquake powerful enough to wipe an entire city off the map is simply impossible. Certainly residents have already felt some tremors. The most recent was in March 2012 in Clinton City, an earthquake of magnitude 1.5, low enough to barely vibrate the windows. The rare tremors felt in the state come from very far away, from Missouri, Canada, and even Illinois. In all of Wisconsin's history, no city has ever suffered the slightest serious damage from an earthquake. So no, Dovland wasn't swallowed up by an earthquake, and yet it did disappear. And even if a chasm had engulfed the whole city, so that would mean the state would have filled in the crater and pretended Loveland never existed in a movie. Why not? But in reality, impossible. As for the dam, some have swallowed cities underwater, but these cities are in the archives. Their ruins are still there, visible under the artificial lakes. When a city dies, it always leaves scars. Even a disastrous military experience would not explain this total emptiness. For example, in Chernobyl the disaster devastated everything, and yet the buildings are there, the carcasses of schools, gutted apartments, children's toys left behind by a bombing, an explosion of insects. Regardless, there would be debris, fragments, physical evidence. But in Dublin, there is nothing left, absolutely nothing. The idea that Dublin was a temporary military base does not hold everywhere either. In the United States, old military installations instill the landscape. Air base, silo a bunker, missiles all abandoned but still standing. Dilapidated buildings covered in graffiti where teenagers venture out at night in search of thrills. Zidovlan had been a military town. Its ruins would still be there. Nothing remains the most credible hypothesis, that of a dead city deserted after an economic collapse, as is Boomtown. Dollars from coal or oil to make a time and then abandon as soon as the resource ran out. But these cities leave traces: deserted streets, ruined houses, dusty storefronts. Duland. She left no skeletons, not even an abandoned root. Like all other theories, the ghost town theory does not hold up. If Devland had been abandoned, it would be ruins, roads washed away by time, buildings eaten away by rust. As for the idea of a city becoming invisible, it is almost science fiction. And yet, no one better explains, sister, than what was Offland in Wisconsin really. A real town, erased from history, or a collective memory, implanted in minds by something we do not understand. No one really knows who started the legend of Dovland in Wisconsin. But one thing is certain: before 2015, no trace, no testimony, no mention of a vanished town in the heart of Wisconsin. Absolutely nothing. The internet just did what it does best: turning a rumor into reality. Fake photos, fake documents, and over-the-counter souvenirs such as furniture, caps, Ovland-branded key rings. Not because people have been there, but because anyone can buy these kinds of things online today. As for those who swear to have visited the Ovland, those who say they have had family there, they are not lying. They are victims of a much more disturbing phenomenon: the Mandela effect. False memories shared by hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. False memories embedded so deeply that they become more real than the truth. The answer is simple. Dovland never existed, but the legend will always exist. There is something deeply terrifying about nuclear contamination. Radioactivity has no form, no color, no smell. It is invisible, silent, and yet it kills. It transforms cities into desert. It makes the living and condemns the earth, sometimes for centuries. And the worst, when the poison is in the air, it's already too late. Nuclear disasters haunt our imagination, and among them, one remains engraved as the worst of doubts: Chernobyl. A silent disaster, invisible but fatal. What chills the blood is the banality of the starting point. A simple security test, nothing alarming. On April 26, 1986, after Piat, the plant employees showed up as they did every morning. No warning signs. No one knew they were unleashing the worst nuclear catastrophe in human history. But it can be. That there had been a sign, a warning, but that he would have paid attention to something so strange. Just before the disaster, several employees and residents claimed to have seen a creature, a gigantic dark silhouette with huge wings and red eyes. They called it the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Simple superstition or real appreciation of an imminent disaster? Before going further, an important detail. We are talking here about Chernobyl with an O. It is the Ukrainian spelling, the one restored after the independence of the country. Chernobyl is the name given by the Russians. Chernobyl is the real name of the nightmare, the Blackbird of Chernobyl, sometimes nicknamed the Chernobyl Man, is a creature that some classify as cryptines and others as omens. In the woods that preceded the disaster, several plant employees claimed to have seen a thing, a massive black silhouette, a headless creature with huge wings and two red eyes shining like fire. He said he was watching them, that it hovered over the power plant as if it was waiting in the days, sometimes hours before the disaster. Some employees of reactor number 4 saw something from the control room. They were observing this black silhouette placed above the signs. Silent and threatening, their description is chilling. A huge dark creature with gigantic wings and blazing red eyes. A vision almost identical to that of another entity known to crepty lovers. The word Point Man present in West Virginia. Here, the Blackbird of Chernobyl was just another form of the same omen. For those unfamiliar with the word man, this is a creature that has become legendary in American folklore. Between November 1966 and December 1967, many residents of West Virginia claim to have encountered this entity, a huge humanoid creature, nearly 2 meters tall with huge black wings and 2 red eyes so bright that its face remained indiscernible in the dark. The first witnesses saw him near an old abandoned munitions factory, vestiges of the Second World War. Terrified, they fled by car, but the Mothman took off on the hour afterwards, hovering over the road, throwing shrill fits and only releasing them at the city limits. An incomprehensible apparition, an omen according to some, a warning. Before the Silver Bridge disaster, which collapsed shortly after, skeptics offer an explanation. More down to earth, the word man would be nothing more than a bird, a Canada crane, or a stray heron. Outside their migratory paths, these birds can make shrill calls and some become aggressive if they feel threatened. But anyone who has ever seen a crane knows that it is not too mist at all and has never had glowing red eyes. Not a humanoid silhouette. The word man, above all, has marked people's minds. For another reason, he would have been seen on the Silver Bridge just before its tragic collapse that cost the lives of 46 people. An apparition seen as a sign, a warning too late. Today, after a joke, the word man is almost a celebrity. There are statues, festivals, and even pizzas are run. But his Ukrainian cousin, the Blackbird of Chernobyl, inspires him less sympathy because its appearance was linked not to a bridge but to a nuclear disaster. The description of the Blackbird of Chernobyl is so similar to that of Mothman that some even joke. The Mothman would have simply taken a vacation in Ukraine. But this resemblance does not amuse everyone, because in both cases the creature appears just before a disaster, a collapsed bridge. A power plant exploded. So is it really just a coincidence that this entity is following something? And if so, what? Those who saw the Blackbird claim to have been haunted immediately after atrocious nightmares. Their phone was ringing for no reason. On the other end of the line, the silence sometimes of threats. Some thought they were being watched by the KGB, but that was only the beginning around the plant. Witnesses and employees spoke of a series of strange events. It all started after the appearance of this dark winged form in the eyes, where I feel fear was gaining in the power plant. The terrified employees eventually told their superiors. But what could they do? A nuclear power plant manager can handle a breakdown. Not a creature pops up out of nowhere and before they know it, reactor number 4 explodes. On April 26, 1986, at 1:23 a.m., Chernobyl reactor number 4 exploded. A breath tears through the night, then a fire that will last more than a week. Meanwhile, huge amounts of radioactive particles are released into the air, poisoning everything they touch. The environment is altered for centuries, but the population of Pripyat is not immediately evacuated. The authorities knew. The danger was obvious. 134 rescuers were hospitalized for acute radiation syndrome. 28 months will have in 3 months. Rather than alerting the world, the Soviet regime tried to hide the scale of the disaster. And when the accident is finally recognized, the state prefers to divert attention to another tragic one, that of 3 Mile Island, in the United States. A smokescreen, a diversion. A lie. a process that is still found today in modern propaganda, from state lies to political disinformation. And yet, despite the explosion, despite the radiation, despite the chaos, some say the black bird has not left, that he was seen floating in the eyes above the charred ruins like a mute spectre, witness to a world that man had just condemned. For those who believe in the black bird of Chernobyl, the creature is not just an animal, it is a bad omen, a harbinger of death and destruction, just like the word man in the United States, which is considered an harbinger, a messenger of disaster. These entities always appear before the catastrophe and never after, as if their role was not to act, but simply to announce and observe the coming collapse. The Mothman had been seen on the Silver Bridge moments before it collapsed. Many see this as more than a coincidence. For them, this creature would be either attracted to disasters or responsible. And if that is the case, then the apparitions of the Chernobyl blackbird just before the reactor explosion become even more disturbing. For that would mean one thing: when this entity appears, death is already on the march. Only one archaeologist has ventured into the Chernobyl exclusion zone, Dr. Robert Maxwell. He explored the site in 2010 and again in 2012. Since then, no other specialist has dared to penetrate this irradiated landscape, even 37 years after the disaster. While there, Maxwell heard many stories about the blackbird, but according to him, the problem is simple. Everyone who claimed to have seen the creature, they died victims of radiation. Over time, the story has transformed. The myth has grown, becoming almost impossible to trace. No hard evidence exists, nothing concrete, nothing but stories. But does it really change anything that a warning was given in the name? Nobody heard him and the disaster occurred as in other cryptids. The blackbird of Chernobyl divides. Some believe in it. Others see it as a legend. But why do these stories fascinate us so much? Because the idea is that somewhere there are creatures, beyond our imagination, obsess us. Some spend their lives tracking Bigfoot. Others hope to one day run into the Mothman. And basically, these creatures often play the same role, that of warning in Slavic folklore. Monsters serve to scare children, but also to protect them. Does not go too far into the forest, the parents said. Don't go near the pond or Baba Yaga. In his house perched on chicken feet, will come and devour you. His stories were stories but also lessons. Perhaps the blackbird of Chernobyl is not so different. A legend born of chaos and a warning masked in fear. The desire to discover the unknown, to prove that creatures like the Mothman, the Bigfoot, or the blackbird really exist. All this often begins in childhood, and for many, this fascination never goes away. There is nothing wrong with believing in these mysterious figures. Nothing wrong with dreaming that the inexplicable is still lurking somewhere, provided that this quest does not end up leading to injuries that may be physical. Certain tales captivate imagination, where a number or sentence might summon reactions, blending myth with allure in unsettling ways, or an entity in our lives. For years, these rumors have been circulating by SMS, email, on YouTube, or simply whispering between children in the schoolyard. It is said that a precise gesture, a forbidden phrase, or a call made at the wrong time is enough to trigger the unthinkable. The idea is terrifying. But what if it was true? What if we unknowingly opened the door that should never be opened? And yet, for years, thousands of people continue to try the experiment out of challenge, out of curiosity, sometimes for play, but often out of obsession with the invisible. Whether it's repeating Bloody Mary in front of a mirror or questioning a Ouija board, the human being seeks to provoke the inexplicable, to cross the boundary between the real world and the unknown. But sometimes the supernatural doesn't hide in a mirror, sometimes it just holds in a series of numbers, and in Bulgaria, one number in particular terrorized an entire country. A simple phone, a curse, and real deaths. This is the story of the cursed number of Bulgaria in the whole world. Some hotels refuse to have a 13th floor. Others avoid numbering a room 13 out of superstition for fear that guests will refuse to sleep there. And in Bulgaria, this same fear led to a more radical gesture. The number 08182888882 has been permanently deactivated. Why? Because over the years, a chilling trend has emerged. Every person who has owned that number has died. It all started in the early 2000s. The very first owner of this number was none other than the CEO of the telephone company Mobitel, the one that had created the number. What's his name? Vladimir Krasnov. In 2001, he was found dead, officially from cancer. Unofficially, some see him as the first victim of the cursed act, have whispered that one of his rivals, jealous of his success, would have exposed him to radioactive materials, silent poisoning. A perfectly orchestrated revenge, but a disturbed detail. Just before his death, Krasnov had received his new number, 08188888188. Just a coincidence or the beginning of a curse? The second victim of this issue was far from being a simple businessman. His name was Konstantin Dimitrov, a well-known number in organized crime circles, a Bulgarian mafia. In 2003, while in the Netherlands, Konstantin was shot dead. A brutal murder and execution signed by a rival gang. Again, it is that shortly before his death, he used the cursed number. A simple series of numbers, but each time, it seemed to announce the end. It is said that Konstantin Dimitrov was in the Netherlands to oversee his drug empire, estimated at nearly $500 million. But jealousy is a weapon more dangerous than bullets. A gun gripper linked to the Russian mafia shot him cold on his body. We found few things, and among her phone is on the screen, a number 0818888828888. Then in 2005, the number is reassigned. This time he stays in Bulgaria, and once again he brings death with him. The last man to pick up this number was another businessman, Konstantin Diklev. He too carried a heavy secret behind his respectable appearances. It was suspected that he ran a particularly lucrative drug trade, but he didn't have time to explain himself. In 2005, while leaving an Indian restaurant, he was shot dead in cold blood in the middle of the street, and again he owned at that time the famous number. After this third death, the decision was made. The number was suspended permanently. Today, if you try to dial these numbers, you will always hear this same message indicating that the number is not assigned or that it is out of coverage. But the real question is perhaps elsewhere. Is the number really off-grid or simply out of reach of the living? Some tried to get answers. They contacted Mobitel, the company behind the number, to find out if it also believed in the curse. But the official response was cold and almost mechanical. We do not comment on individual numbers. Do they believe the rumor, or do they just prefer not to talk about it? Anyway, one thing is certain, the 0818288818882 AAA had a brief existence and 3 of its owners lost their lives. The Bulgarian story of this number is strange, but it is not unique across the world of numbers, haunting the collective imagination. In Thailand, 9999999 is known as the number of death. The legend is simple and chilling. If you want to die, dial this number after 00EC and you will disappear. Some say it was just a marketing stunt for a movie, but if in doubt, who would really dare to dial that number? In the United States, another number causes fear. 8001 812ZZ263. No immediate death here, but what the responders recount having heard. A golden voice. She counts slowly from 1 to 7. Then the voice pronounces the name of the one who called her. She describes the caller and says exactly where he is and what he is doing. They describe the most terrifying sensations, as if something or someone was standing right behind them in Asia. Another number arouses a particular fear. The Yindran deeds ended. Considered one of the most haunted numbers on the continent. It would be a call from the dead. Seeing this number appear on their screen would mean that a deceased person is trying to contact us, a loved one, a friend, or maybe something else. Those who responded said they heard a voice of gold, and she asks for one thing. Get 15 people to call that number in turn, and if one refuses or fails, then death will fall into water. And even for those who accept, their price is heavy. Extreme mental distress, because talking to the dead is never without consequences even today in many Asian countries. Many even refuse to pick up when a strange number appears. And no matter where you look on the planet, there is always a story, a mystery number, a string of forbidden numbers, and a warning does not pick up. Because that's where the real nightmare lies. You never know if these stories are true, and that is precisely what makes them timeless. Abandoned hospitals are arguably just behind the deserted funeral homes and sanitariums on the list of the most terrifying places to visit. There is something in these dirty corridors covered in disturbing graffiti, these medical equipment left behind, these rusty hospital beds, these care carts forgotten in a corner. And especially this oppressive impression that the souls of patients still lurk in the corridors of patients who once entered the facility and never left. For some, these places are hell on earth. For others, they represent the ideal place for an encounter with the beyond. In Moscow, an abandoned hospital alone caused unease, the Overinskaya Hospital. A building so sinister that some compared it directly to a Resident Evil set. Its brutal architecture, its gutted floors, its gaping windows, everything about this place evoked an apocalypse. Some said it was the perfect place to shoot a Russian version of The Walking Dead or to film the actual collapse of humanity. But behind Owenskaya's tacked walls and crumbling halls, one question remained. What really happened in this hospital? What happened to make it called the Moscow Haunted Hospital? Owenskaya Hospital was not just an abandoned hospital. It was an unfinished project. Located in the Ovrino district north of Moscow, it was to accommodate 1,300 beds. Work began in 1980, following the architectural standards of the Soviet Union. The building was built in the brutalist style, a term that sounds grim, but actually refers to a minimalist and austere style of architecture. No ornamentation, no superfluous details, just raw concrete, angular geometric shapes, and an atmosphere as cold as it is impersonal. But in the case of the Overinskaya, this brutalist style was not trivial. His bare concrete, his aggressive nails, and his unfinished gigantism gave in. This hospital had a strange shape, a kind of star, or rather, according to some, a strange mixture between a deformed snowflake and the symbol of biochance. Many compared his plan to the L'Umbria Corporation logo from Resident Evil, and this chilling resemblance wasn't just visual. The place seemed straight out from a nightmare. But what made this hospital so disturbing was something else. The construction site was abruptly stopped in 1985. Then the building was abandoned. Left as it was, this giant carcass remained frozen in time. as if something, somewhere, had condemned this hospital before it even opened. An abandoned hospital is already a worrying place in itself. But Overinskaya Hospital, it was worse. It was not a finished building and then deserted. It was an incomplete construction, a concrete skeleton with partial walls, collapsed floors, and an endless corridor. Some floors were just suspended platforms, bits of structure on the edge of the void, and in the basements. It was another nightmare. The multi-level basement was constantly flooded, forming stagnant puddles where the light would go out, an unfinished labyrinth, a trap in a place so sinister that rumors of haunting have become inevitable. The reasons why construction of the hospital was halted remain unclear. Some put forward a simple explanation: a lack of substance in a USSR already in crisis long before its collapse in 1991, but others. There are much darker theories. Some speak of paranormal phenomena at the construction site. Others evoke a hidden accident, or worse, a biological experiment gone wrong. One extreme rumor even claims that a zombie epidemic has broken out in the heart of the hospital, which has been unfinished for 25 years. The building rotted in abandonment in the heart of Moscow, and little by little, it entered a macabre list, that of the most terrifying places on the planet. And back there, they said you should never go down to the basements. Around the Uvinskaya Hospital, rumors have multiplied. Apparitions, murders, people who took their own lives, or even satanic rituals. But the darkest story is that of the Nemosphere cult. This satanic sect would have taken up residence in the abandoned hospital. Inside, they would have practiced sacrificial rituals on animals, but also on humans. According to legend, they are responsible for mysterious disappearances in the district of Ofrino. Children, homeless people, pets, all lured into the devastated corridors of the hospital and never found. Facing the horror, the police allegedly organized a raid with a riot squad. They allegedly entered the building, but the cult members refused to surrender. Cornered in flooded basements, they would all have been shot. Others say police rigged the hallway with explosives and flooded the basement to bury them alive despite the massacre. Other satanic groups reportedly continue to frequent the hospital over the years. The walls covered with demonic and occult graffiti testify to this, and beyond the rituals, told that the souls trapped in these places still shouted that in the corridors of Overinskaya Hospital, hell had become real. Some also say that the hospital was built on an old cemetery. The tombs would never have been moved. They would have simply been buried under the foundations of the hospital. Since then, those who dare to enter the building after sunset report chilling visions, perfectly visible spectral apparitions, human silhouettes motionless or slowly slipping between the cracked walls. Others speak of more disturbing shapes, strange conical silhouettes moving in the shadows with no apparent logic. But the visions aren't the worst. Because visitors also say they heard children crying, muffled screams, echoing cries in empty rooms. In the corridors of this hospital, the past never sleeps. Like many of her leaving the hospital, Overinskaya drew her share of urban explorers and thrill seekers. The place was not guarded at night, leaving the most daring to roam freely in these dilapidated corridors. But these visits often ended badly. In Moscow, we rarely meet homeless people on the streets as in other capitals. He hides elsewhere in abandoned buildings like the Overinskaya Hospital. Stories abound. Some explorers say they have been pursued by homeless people assaulted in the dark. On the other hand, by brutal accidents, broken legs falling into invisible holes, rusty iron bars planted in the flesh, sudden floods catching intruders in the basements. Because in the hospital, it is not only the ghost that must be feared, but also the living and the place itself. The hospital has not only been the scene of accidents, it has also been the scene of despair. In 2005, a drama marked the place. Alexis creates a skin. A 16-year-old teenager, nicknamed Created by his friends, threw himself into the elevator shaft from the 8th floor. Official motive, a heartache, and for years, his loved ones came to leave flowers, cigarettes, and poems near the cellar, as if to honor his spirit. But fear is not the only victim. Corpses have also been discovered in the hospital over the years. Bodies abandoned by opportunistic murderers because in a place that everyone avoided, hiding a body was easy. In 2013, the building became the setting for a documentary inspired by the Blair Witch Project, Prysrakis Corridor. Understand by this the ghost of Ofrina. The film follows 4 friends who decide to shoot a fake documentary around the nearby forest. Once the scene of human sacrifices by ancient sorcerers according to a rumor, but instead of creating a legend, they find something. Only the cameras will be found, and in their shaky images, the viewer discovers that sometimes affection joins horror, and if one day, a sensation-loving tourist goes to Moscow, dreaming of visiting the Orenskaya hospital, that's impossible. In 2018, the building was completely demolished. Not a wall, not an elevator shaft does not leave a trace. Today, in place of this concrete carcass, all that remains is an empty field surrounded by silent breads. But some still say that even without a building, the mill never left. In 2012, plans were made to finally raise the hospital and build new buildings on the site. The site was even put up for auction, but its price, estimated at 1.8 billion rubles, was considered far too high. Nobody wanted to buy it. The Monier building therefore remained there, suspended like a frozen nightmare in the heart of Moscow. In 2014, the authorities finally announced the demolition of the site, followed by the construction of a new medical facility, but delays continued to accumulate. In 2015, the government promised the imminent destruction of the hospital, but nothing happened. It was not until 2018 that the hospital was finally demolished. The debris from the building was recycled for other construction projects, a common practice in Moscow, but the residents themselves, they have not forgotten, and many still refuse to approach the empty lot where they once stood. Of all the creatures that lurk in the dark, few are as haunting as the vampire. For centuries, this Balafat figure has haunted the nightmares of the elders. Almost every culture has its own version of this nocturnal predator. The one that feeds our imaginations the most comes from a single place, Eastern Europe. This region is full of bloody stories, such as the story of Peter Blagojevich, nicknamed the Vampire of Kiselevo. In this 18th century Serbian village, his death triggered a real wave of panic. The locals were convinced that Blagojevich had returned from the dead to feed on the living. Legend has it that, terrified, the villagers exhumed his body. What they discovered then only engraved their fear. A swollen corpse, still fresh and blood still running from his lips. They drove pus into his heart, a desperate move in the hope of ending the nightmare. Stories like these sparked vampiric hysteria across Europe. A fear so strong that she once aspired to a writer named Bram Stoker and gave birth to a legend, Dracula. Peter Blagojevich was a simple Serbian peasant, born in 1662. He spent his life in the discreet village of Kisilova, probably the current one that became Lievo. His life was nothing exceptional until his death in 1725, the causes of which remain unclear even today. But it was after his disappearance that the horror began. In the space of 8 days, the village was struck by a series of mysterious deaths. 9 villagers, all of whom were struck down suddenly after being struck down by a strange illness, just 24 hours before their end. An unknown evil and a growing suspicion. Was Blagojevich really in his grave? Sudden deaths were not uncommon in 18th century villages. But here something was wrong, because each of the victims on their deathbeds told the same story. They said they had been strangled by a man they all knew, their neighbor, Petard Blagojevich. And that was not all. His own widow claimed that he had come to visit her one night, not in a dream, but in the flesh. He would have simply asked her for offensives, peasant shoes. Panicked, she left the village, fleeing her own husband who had returned from the dead. In the minds of the inhabitants, only one word began to circulate: vampire. The stories multiplied, and all of them were more and more disturbing. Another story claimed that Blagojevich had returned to his own house in the dead of night. He asked for food from his own son. When the young man refused, Blagojevich allegedly attacked her. Savagely, he would have beaten him to death, draining his body of blood. Faced with the growing panic, the villagers made a radical decision. They went terribly to Gojevich. His corpse had to be inspected for signs of vampirism, hair or beard that would continue to grow, longer nails, and especially a body that was not sufficiently decomposed. The whole village held its breath, because if they were right, evil was already among them. Determining a dead person was not a decision to be taken lightly, but the inhabitants were determined. They demanded that the exhumation of Blagojevich be done under the supervision of the local officer Cameral, Principal Frumbavt, accompanied by the priest of the village from Baldetenta. To oppose it, he explained that he needed permission from the authorities in Belgrade, but no one listened to him. The villagers were convinced of one thing: they were dealing with a vampire, and in these beliefs they had no time to waste. After all, according to local legends, entire villages had already been wiped out by vampires during the Ottoman period. Faced with the fear of seeing the inhabitants rise up or flee the Balfron village of Seda, he attended the exhumation. He took care to draw up an official report documenting every detail of what he was about to see. Fontel constrained and Malales therefore attended the examination of the body, in the company of the priest of Velikogradiste, and in his official notes he put something disturbing. The corpse corresponded to the classic descriptions of a vampire. Blagojevich's body was not decomposed, his hair and beard had grown, but most disturbing, he had blood around his mouth, and even inside his skin seemed to have grown back in places. His nails were strangely new too. Faced with these signs, the villagers panicked. Convinced that they were in the presence of a vampire, they decided to drive a stake through his heart. Frumbavt, always skeptical, let it happen, and what he observed then marked him forever. At the moment when the stake pierced the corpse, Blagojevich's body spurted fresh blood from his mouth and ears. The terrified inhabitants did not take any risks. They immediately burned the body because in their mind there was only one certainty: as long as it remained to descend, the vampire could not return. In his official report, Frumbavt took care to conclude with a clear request that the authorities did not hold him responsible for what had just happened. He described the villagers as being beside themselves, paralyzed by terror, and specified that, in his opinion, exhumation and the stake driven into the heart were the only possible options. In the end, the authorities remained surprisingly indifferent. They did not investigate further. A corpse in the palace was probably a reasonable price to pay if it was enough to keep the population under control. That was the end of the story, officially at least. Stories of vampires have been circulating for centuries, but Frontbald's testimony remains unique. It is one of the earliest documented accounts of vampirism in Eastern Europe. His report was published in a Viennese newspaper of the time, and the story of Vagojevic, the Kiselyevo vampire, spread like wildfire throughout Europe. These official narratives helped fuel the real vampiric hysteria. From the 18th century, not only in the Balkans, but also in Germany, France, and even England, the vampire had just left the graves and was slowly entering the minds. Did Frontbald's report testify to a real encounter with the vampire, a collective superstition, or other things? In fact, there are far more rational explanations. Because making people believe that the dead come out of their graves is simpler than we imagine. Since the urbanization of the 11th century, Europe faced a growing health problem: their promiscuity between the living and the dead. In this deeply religious era, people built their homes and businesses as close to churches and therefore as close to cemeteries as possible. A situation that suited the church well, which received comfortable sums thanks to burials. But who, without anyone knowing it yet, prepared the ground for the darkest legends? The priests benefited greatly from the system. Last sacrament, funeral mass, concession. Everything paid off. And the superstitious villagers died, reassured, buried near their loved ones, protected by the prayers of the church. But with urbanization, an insidious problem arose. Cities grew larger and cemeteries overflowed. More space, more extension possible. In the 17th century, grave diggers were forced to stack the dead. No more burials at 2-meter depth, we were often content with 2 feet of earth. Worse still, the poor, the plague-stricken, the forgotten were piled into mass graves. No coffins, just a cloth shroud thrown there in the tent of oblivion. But rain, floods, or sometimes a pack of hungry dogs was enough. And the corpses were coming back to the surface. Some were rotten, but others, strangely enough, seemed almost healthy, better fed than on their deathbed. These corpses, discarded by the earth, perfectly matched the descriptions of the ancient Slavic ghosts called vampires or hippies, the dead who refused to rot. But today, modern science offers a much more rational explanation, which resembles hair or nails growing after death. Is actually only an optical effect. The skin retracts, leaving these tissues appear longer. As for vampiric symptoms, they are often only natural consequences of decomposition or diseases that were little known at the time. But there is another problem in the story. Frontbald's report of himself. Did he really see what he said, or was he just trying to protect himself? Maybe he thought it was a drama. Would antiquity ward off reprisals from the authorities, or can artists simply be swept away by collective panic? In any case, the story of Blagojevic has become much more than a news item. It embodies the fear of disease, the dead who refuse to die, and a society on the verge of chaos that we see in it. A simple cautionary tale or a reflection of the human spirit confronted with the incomprehensible, the legend of the vampire of Kiselyevo. Continue to fascinate and blur the line between myth and reality. For centuries, a strange rumor has been circulating, that of a mysterious substance with a name as enigmatic as it is threatening, Red Mercury. It is said that since the Middle Ages, alchemists were already looking for it, convinced that it contained unparalleled power. But it was at the heart of the Cold War that this dark matter acquired an even more sinister reputation. Red Mercury was becoming, in the eyes of some, a weapon, and maybe something even worse. Hidden behind the Iron Curtain, Red Mercury remained a complete mystery to the West. It was said to have incredible, almost supernatural properties, but its true nature remained unclear. For some, it was an alchemical elixir, able to cure any disease. For others, it was far more dangerous, a key component in making Soviet nuclear bombs. And even worse, some claimed that this substance would have the power to invoke supernatural entities. So what is red mercury? What is it really for? Above all, does it only exist? It all depends on who you ask the question. Like many conspiracy theories and urban legends, there is no clear answer regarding red mercury. Only one thing made by consensus: it would be a powder, a red liquid with strange appearance and extraordinary properties. The problem: its properties change depending on who is talking about it. Some claim it cures diseases, others swear it can cause nuclear explosions. But one thing is for sure: whether it's a weapon, a poison, or a sacred relic, red mercury continues to fuel fantasies and fears. The true nature of red mercury remains elusive, however tempting it ever existed. Today, many experts put forward a simpler theory: that red mercury is just an invention, an illusion of fear, amplified by decades of rumor, manipulation, and conspiracy theory. Was it ever anything but a mirage? But then, why are so many people still looking for it? The total absence of scientific press to add to contradictory testimonies, and the impossibility of giving a clear definition only amplifies the mystery. This is where the attraction of red mercury lies. It is not what it is, but what one imagines it might be, a secret capable of healing or destroying. No one knows to this day which side the truth is on. Why this obsession with red mercury? Over time, it has become the modern equivalent of the philosopher's stone, a scientific, alchemical, and military myth. Its exact origin remains unclear. Some believe that the legend was born with the Soviet nuclear program, but other historians claim that rumors around this mysterious substance go back much further in the past. It can be even down to the first alchemists, since forever. He is credited with immense power, but it is impossible to know if he was ever real. From the beginning, it was only a well-maintained illusion. Some believers go further. According to them, when the medieval alchemist Jabir Ibn Hayyan wrote, "The most precious elixirs ever created on earth were sealed in the pyramids," he was actually referring here to red mercury. But does this ancient clue really provide answers? Not really. In this version of the myth, red mercury would be a scarlet substance hidden not in temples, but in the throats of Egyptian mummies, a forgotten secret of the pharaohs. This ancient form would be above all a magical elixir capable of curing any disease, an absolute remedy, or a poison depending on the hand that holds it. So the question remains, why would such a thing have been hidden in the heart of the tombs? This legend had two very real consequences. First, it provoked the looting of graves. Thieves convinced that red mercury was hidden in mummies ransacked millennia-old graves in search of this supposedly magical substance. Then it inspired the modern crooks. On the internet, you can find dubious sites that claim to sell red mercury supposedly extracted from an ancient mummy, all naturally at exorbitant prices. However, one fact remains indisputable. No serious Egyptologist has ever found the slightest trace of this substance. This version of the myth therefore seems to have found its place not in the pyramids, but in contemporary scams. Fast forward a few centuries, the red mercury resurfaces, this time at the heart of the Cold War. In the 1980s, the first official mentions appeared in both Soviet and Western media, but the details remained vague. Almost every time the substance is associated with one thing: the Soviet nuclear weapons program. No one knew exactly what red mercury was, but everyone was convinced of one thing: it was a threat, and it came from the East. It was said that red mercury possessed extraordinary explosive properties. According to Western media, this mysterious substance acted as a powerful catalyst capable of tenfold the destructive force of conventional explosives used by the USRSS. Some went no further. Even in infinite quantities mixed with explosives, it would have made it possible to produce disproportionate detonation power in a world obsessed with secret weapons. This rumor had the effect of a bomb. In the midst of the Cold War, red mercury was quickly linked to the nuclear race. It was also rumored to have strange thermal and radioactive properties, to the point of becoming for some a key element in the manufacture of Soviet bombs, a secret weapon, invisible, and may already be ready for use. After the collapse of the URSS, the stories around Red Mercury have taken a much scarier turn. It was now said that he was untraceable, undetectable, and that a simple amount, the size of a tennis ball, would be enough to cause a massive nuclear explosion. Rumors were that an unknown nuclear material, conceived in secret in Soviet laboratories, was now being sold on the black market by deserting scientists. The world feared it would fall into the hands of terrorists, but this foretold apocalypse never came. Yet governments managed to exploit this old fear in 2004. In the United Kingdom, several men were arrested, accused of wanting to buy Red Mercury to make a dirty bomb and hit the wave. In 2015, the same scenario in Turkey, members of the Islamic State were captured while trying to buy the substance. Today, some blame the authorities. What if, instead of denying the rumors, governments had preferred to maintain the myth? After all, Red Mercury has become an ideal weapon, a trap to catch what dreams of sowing terror. And almost immediately after this nuclear hysteria ended, the myth of Red Mercury evolved. It ceased to be a mere atomic material. It became an ancient substance with occult properties. By this point, the Red Mercury had become what the buyer wanted it to be: a healing elixir, a secret weapon, a magical object. No matter what crooks fit, no matter what we were looking for, he claimed the Red Mercury. He could do it. It was more of a weapon. It was a tailor-made illusion, and he continued to entrap those who dared to believe it. This obsession revived an old version of the myth. Red Mercury is believed to come from mummies, capable of healing the sick. Even today, if you search the internet on dubious sites, you could find tiny vials of so-called Red Mercury sold for several $1,000s. But the story doesn't end there. The rumors have multiplied, becoming more and more absurd. Some now claim that Red Mercury is not only found in mummies, but in bat nests. An absurd rumor that has pushed modern gold diggers to ransack protected habitats, believing they can extract the famous red liquid. A small annoying detail for these researchers: bats do not build nests, but faced with the evidence, some have imagined a new explanation. Red Mercury would only come then vampire bats. And by extension, this substance would have the same properties as vampires. In old horror movies, one can see fake videos of people showing Red Mercury repelled by garlic, attracted by gold, and even without reflection in front of a mirror, exactly like vampires. But the most ironic thing in all this is that often, the famous filmed liquid is just a simple animation in computer-generated images. The worst part is that it doesn't stop some people from believing it, and the strangest thing is yet to come. In the 2000s, a rumor ignited the Arab world. Red Mercury would now be able to make appear jinns, supernatural creatures similar to genies, but much more dangerous. In 2009, a new madness spread on social networks. No more need to loot the pyramids or hunt bats. Red Mercury would hide in old Singer sewing machines. As a result, people rushed to these sewing machines, which were then resold at gold prices. The police had to intervene to stop this massive fraud. This is what Red Mercury has become today: a malleable legend, capable of taking all forms and trapping all eras. Does Red Mercury really exist? Sort of. But we must not rejoice too quickly. It has nothing to do with the powers attributed to it. Its real name is cinnabar, or mercury sulfide. A bright red stone that actually contains mercury has been used since antiquity to decorate pottery. And that's it. No magical properties, no secret nuclear weapon, just a substance that is toxic to humans, because mercury is extremely dangerous to health. As for the idea that cinnabar was a key ingredient in the Soviet arsenal, there is no evidence, nothing more than a mixture of collective fear, fantasy, Cold War, and an old distrust of anything that might come from the East. In science fiction, time travel is almost commonplace. In reality, not really. Logical, scientific, and technical reasons make us think that traveling to the past or the future is simply impossible. Finally, not quite, because according to special relativity and Einstein's general relativity, it is technically possible to move into the future, even by a few milliseconds. But let's be honest, until we have a fictional time machine, no one is going anywhere. Well, that's what we thought until the story of Sergei Ponomarenko, a man who, according to some, would have literally disappeared from Kiev in 1958 to reappear without understanding in Kiev in 2006. A trick can be, except that there are photos and videos dated 2006 showing Sergei lived as in the 50s, looking totally lost. So the question becomes more troubling. What if Sergei Ponomarenko had actually traveled through time, and especially how? On 23 April 2006, in Kiev, the police arrested a man aged about 30. They walked the streets, totally disoriented, constantly asking what year is it. When the agents ask him for his identity, they answer with a trembling voice, "My name is Sergei Ponomarenko, and there are two means. I was in 1958. The police, at first perplexed, demand an identity document. Sergei holds it out. A Soviet identity card, an official document from the time when Ukraine was still part of the United States, RSS. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, so his paper was at least 15 years old. But that's not all, and the officers look up and realize with amazement that the young man's face matches perfectly. In the photo on the document, and another detail strikes, his clothes, a typical style of the 50s, completely shifted in modern Kiev. Did the police really just arrest a man from the past? Instead of modern clothes, our man wore an antique outfit typical of the 50s. Around his neck was an old film camera, a relic of a bygone era. The police, baffled, came to a simple conclusion. This man was probably insane. They took him to a psychiatric clinic in Kiev, where he was entrusted to Dr. Pablo Kotrikov. April 23, 2006. The doctor recorded the session. On the video, Sergei calmly stated his name was Sergei Valentinovich Ponomarenko, born in Kiev on June 16, 1932. Problem is, the man sitting in front of the doctor wasn't 74. He looked barely 30. When the psychiatrist asked him his age, Sergei answered without hesitation that he was 25 years old. He then said that he was walking with his fiancée, Valentina Kurich, and that he had just taken a picture with his camera. Then suddenly, something had caught his eye. A strange object in the sky. It was the last thing he remembered before finding himself projected into a world he no longer recognized. Sergei described the object as having a bell shape and moving in a totally abnormal way, thinking he could observe it better. He raised his camera and took a picture. It was at that moment, according to him, that everything had changed. In a fraction of a second, it found itself projected in 2006. It could have been dismissed as the delirium of a lost man. Except that Sergei claimed to have proof his camera still contained the film. For Dr. Kutrikov, this was his chance to decide, was he dealing with a disturbed man or something much more disturbing, so he developed the photos. What he discovered only reinforced the mystery. Sergei's old camera posed a problem, impossible to develop his film with modern techniques. An expert in photography was therefore urgently called upon receiving the film. The specialist was stunned. The film was very authentic, a model withdrawn from the market in the 1970s. However, it was in perfect condition and the photos could be developed. The result was even more disturbing. Photos of Kiev in the 1950s, the portrait of a young woman, presumably Sergei's fiancée, a photo of Sergei himself wearing exactly the clothes of the interview with Dr. Kutrikov. But above all, a clear and sharp photo of a bell-shaped UFO suspended in the sky, exactly as Sergei had described it. Faced with his evidence, a new recorded session was held on 25th of April 2006. The doctor showed the pictures to Sergei, who simply replied that he had been right. He added almost apologetically that he did not understand what this object was in the sky, nor how, by taking a picture, he ended up where he was. He explains that when he looked down from his camera, he was no longer in his time. After this conversation, Sergei was escorted back to his secure room in the clinic. The cameras showed him entering, but never get out. He disappeared without a trace. The bars on the windows made escape impossible. The police found themselves in a real disappearance case. Searching through old Soviet records, they discovered that the name was real, Sergei Ponomarenko of Kiev. But according to the records, this man had been reported missing in 1960. The investigation continued, and thanks to the photo of Valentina, his fiancée, the police found a woman, an old lady about 70 years old. She confirmed the story. Her fiancé Sergei had disappeared suddenly in 1958 for only a few days, because after those days of mystery, Sergei had returned. When Sergei returned from his first disappearance, Valentina said that he seemed different. He was talking about the future. He said he saw impossible things, cell phones, futuristic machines. He was even interviewed on national television, where he announced that people would one day have communication at their fingertips. Even more disturbing, Valentina showed investigators a strange photo. According to her, Sergei had sent her since the year 2050. In the photo, an aged Sergei, standing in front of a futuristic Kiev and bristling with skyscrapers that did not exist in 1958 or 2006. The last time Valentina Havit, her fiancé, was in 1970. He disappeared a second time, and this time he never came back. It seemed that his last time travel had been. What makes the story of Sergei Ponomarenko fascinating is that there are actual video recordings of atheists, as well as photos of Sergei himself of what he saw in the sky, and even of his Soviet identity card. But on closer inspection, one detail raises questions. On the identity card handed to the policeman, the official stamp appears blurred, as if the ink on the stamp had almost run out. However, in Soviet times, maps like Sumal always had a clearly visible dark stamp, an error, falsification, or anomaly that no one yet understands. And here may be the most disturbing downfall of this story. Evidence, they themselves are suspicious. First, Sergei's ID card. In a video, he claims to be born on June 16, 1932, but on his official document, if you look closely, an inconsistency stands out. The word written in Cyrillic alphabet concerning his birth word means March and not June. Sergei would have been born in March 1932, not June. A strange mistake for an official document supposed to prove his identity. But there is something more serious about the photo film. The narrative claims that she was a discontinued type in the 70s and yet in perfect condition in 2006. This detail shocks. The film used by Sergei from the Soviet brand Zvema was still marketed until 1990. Nothing unusual or surprising to find in 2006. Also, if Sergei had actually come from 1958, his film would have had to be in a catastrophic state. Made of cellulose acetate, this type of film had to be preserved under very precise conditions. Constant temperature, controlled humidity. Even under these optimal conditions, after 50 years, it would have started to disintegrate, smelling strongly of vinegar, a phenomenon known as a Vinaigre syndrome. Clearly, his film should never have been exploitable. And if that's not enough, in the photo apparently taken in 2050, we see Sergei in front, the river of Kiev. But if we observe the skyscrapers in the background, we could see a particular detail. Several towers are perfectly identical, repeated in the image. A simple copy and paste effect, a rather silly Photoshop montage. In the end, behind the fascinating story of Kiev's time traveler, we find mostly inconsistencies, manipulated details, and a narrative too perfect to be true. Sergei Ponomarenko has never traveled through time, but his story continues to trap those who still want to believe it. Lost in the forests of Vermont, near the small town of Brunswick, lie 6 modest springs called simply Brunswick Springs. At first glance, nothing impressive, a small waterfall splitting into 6 separate streams of water before emptying into the Connecticut River. Each source would have a different composition: iron, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, bromide. What about arsenic? Nothing that apparently justifies that in 1984 the famous replace believe it turned qualified this place as the 8th wonder of the world. And yet for centuries the Abenaki people have considered these lands sacred. The sources themselves would be endowed with healing power. But to our darker side surrounds Brunswick Springs. It is said that these lands would be cursed and that anyone would try to build on them would be condemned. The belief that Brunswick Springs is home to something special dates back to the Abenaki, the native people of the area. For centuries. They consider these springs and the surrounding lands sacred. The Abenaki made long journeys to reach these waters. Their healers used the springs to heal the sick, purify the bodies and soothe the spirits. But an intriguing detail remains. These rituals were only performed in broad daylight, because once night fell, no one dared approach Brunswick Springs. For the Abenaki, Brunswick Springs was much more than just a place of healing. It was a place of spiritual balance. Under the light of day, the waters were considered a sacred basin, carrying care and life. But as night fell, the nature of the place changed. Darkness filled the springs, and the elders told of something dangerous lurking in the vicinity. The first written record of the healing powers of Brunswick Springs dates back to 1748. This story tells that a French soldier, wounded after being seriously hit in the arms, was led to the springs by the abbots born under the supervision of a shaman. He was placed under the stream of water and against all odds his arm healed. But after the war, the soldier returned with completely different intentions. He wanted to bottle water and sell what he saw as a miraculous resource. The Abenakis, horrified, opposed him. Taking advantage of sacred nature in this way was a blasphemous act. A struggle broke out, and in the confusion, an Abenaki man and his child were killed. The man's wife, an Abenaki witch, reacts in a radical way, cursing Brunswick Springs. From then on, the legend says anyone who tried to profit from the springs would be condemned. And when you look at the history of the place, the curse seems to have worked perfectly. In 1832, the first house was built on the hill overlooking the springs. Then in 1861, Hotel Villejour, the Brunswick Spring House. A facility was built directly above the springs and offered magical water piped directly into each of the 60 fields. The brochures touted the medicinal waters of the Great Spirit, attracting visitors from all over the region. Success was immediate. A certain Dr. Ruel, a dentist of his state, bought the hotel in 1894. Faced with the crowds, he decided to expand the building. Shortly thereafter, the hotel mysteriously burned down. Ruel refused to give in. He had it rebuilt and the site remained in operation until his death in 1910. John Huskins bought the property and renamed the hotel the Pinecrest Lodge. Everything went well until 1929, when the hotel was reduced to ashes by a new fire. Huskins obstinate rebuilt, but in 1930, the hotel burned again. Incredulous at the rumors of a curse, he tried one last time. In 1931, the hotel was destroyed by a third consecutive fire. This was Huskins' last attempt. This time he gave up. Records reveal that one of the fires was caused by the ignition of paint vapor in one storage room, and for the others, no official explanation was ever found. Today, decades later, almost nothing remains of the Brunswick Spring House, just a slab of concrete, a remnant of the foundations, and worm stairs leading to the old basement. Another worn staircase descends again to the springs themselves. On the bank, hidden under the brambles, you can see the ruins of an old catchment building collapsed and forgotten the rest. was swallowed up by the forest as if the earth had taken back what belonged to it. Hotel fires aren't the only events that have fueled rumors of a curse around Brunswick Springs. Since the destruction of the last settlement, the area has been marked by other tragedies. 2 men took their own lives there. A woman plunged her car into the nearby lake voluntarily, and even more chilling, an infant strangled was found near the springs, not far away. Silver Lake adds to the eerie vibe. According to Abenaki legend, it is bottomless. Some visitors swear to have seen at nightfall the spectral silhouette of the Abenaki witch wandering along the rivers. Other stories refer to Rogers Rangers, British soldiers who fought in the War of 1754. It is said that they hid a looted treasure in the vicinity, a treasure that was never recovered. The soldiers would be lost in the forest and never come back. Of course, no scientist will be able to prove that Brunswick Springs water heals anyone, nor that the earth is actually cursed. But if you ask the inhabitants, many will say that they still believe in the power of these waters. As for the risk of seeing someone build on their land, the question no longer arises, because today the Abenaki have officially regained possession of the site. They bought the area through their company Wabanaki Incorporation before ceding development rights to the Vermont Land Trust. A clear agreement has been signed. No more buildings will ever be built here and no new commercial activity. From German verse, Brunswick Springs once again belonged to their original keeper, and now no one will be able to enjoy their secrets. In 1971, in the north of England, the Robson family lived in Hexham, a quiet little village in northern Berlin. But their daily life changed the day they unearthed small stone heads in their garden, simple artifacts at first glance. She was barely 6 centimeters tall. The first was nicknamed the boy because of its masculine skull shape. The other, the girl, sported feminine features and long hair. But as soon as they were discovered, everything changed. The heads seemed to move on their own, and that was just the beginning. The most terrifying phenomenon occurred shortly afterwards. One of the children of the family saw the front door open by itself in front of him, and there on the threshold, a monstrous creature stood, a master half sheep, half human. A neighbor would also have seen this frozen thing in front of the house. When the child's cries alerted the family, the creature was gone. The exams had just begun. It is the 2 young boys of the Robson family who, while digging in the garden, mere tagging the 2 mysterious stones, as they searched the earth, they came upon stones carved in strange shapes. Vaguely human heads, what was later called exams. In reality, there was nothing very realistic about these heads. Crudely carved in stone, they looked more like rough spheres extended by a small blow, as if they had once been attached to another object now gone. Each person who had their heads in their hands described them differently. But one thing always came up: they held in the palm of one hand, not masterpieces. Simple approximate faces carved into the rock. But as soon as these stones were brought back into the house, terror set in. The heads were seen moving on their own, as if animated by invisible hands. Bottles were thrown through the rooms, the calm of the hearth was shattered, and the anguish was permanent. The paranormal was not limited to the Robson family. Their neighbors too began to make disturbing testimonies. Their young son once claimed to have felt invisible hands tugging at his hair. The story of the examinations quickly attracted the attention of the press, and faced with the media coverage, specialists of Neolithic art came to examine the stones. But even the experts were baffled. The heads were studied, dated, analyzed, and each official report contradicted the previous one. The only consensus was that the stones looked close to ancient Celtic heads. These mysterious artifacts carved in the Celtic tradition. The investigation was therefore entrusted to a renowned figure, Dr. Anne Ross, recognized specialist of Celtic objects, who personally took charge of the study of the Hertz examinations. But the ones she was going to live, no one would have imagined. By agreeing to study the Hertz exams, Dr. Ann Ross would have unknowingly opened her own door to the curse. In her official reports, she described a chilling scene. One night she saw a hybrid creature, half wolf, half man, wandering upstairs in a house. She followed the figure into the kitchen, where she disappeared shortly afterwards. His daughter, Bernice Ross, experienced similar phenomena. Almost every night she felt a cold presence behind her. Always when the Stones were in the house, it quickly became obvious to all that the Heads examinations exerted a supernatural influence, for once the Stones were removed, the apparitions ceased. But the case took an unexpected turn. A certain Desmond Craig showed up. He claimed to be the author of Le Fan Pierre Still on Him in 1956, when he lived in the same house as the Robisons. Later, he allegedly made 3 small stone heads to distract his daughter. One was lost and the other 2 were discovered by the Hobson boys. To create them, he would have used simply local water, sand and stone. But his story raised doubts. He was asked to reproduce the stones in front of a witness. The result was rudimentary, far from the original heads. Even more disturbing, Professor Derman of Newcastle University claimed that the exam heads had been artificially molded. Even as they were supposed to be carved out of the rock, the enigma grew thicker. For years, researchers have been interested in these cursed objects, until the Pians finished at the University of Southampton then, in 1978, were entrusted to a medium. Since then, total silence, the exams have disappeared. No one knows today where they are or who holds them. The exam heats, originally believed to be from the Celtic tradition, soon became associated with something more ominous, a curse. But another, more obscure theory surfaced. The heads were connected not with the Celts, but with Norse mythology, and more specifically, with a legendary creature, the Volva. In residential, the Volva is a Miomilu being, powerful but generally benevolent, unless you provoke him. Now, the creature seen by Dr. Ross and her daughter corresponded precisely to this description. The people of Hexham had every reason to fear such an entity. Why? Because in 1904 the village had already experienced a series of strange attacks. The culprit? A wild wolf described as abnormally large and fierce. Some, even at the time, believed it to be supernatural. This wolf was eventually found run over by a train while fleeing the fields after slaughtering cattle. But in 1970, when the lupine silhouette appeared around the exams, the elders made the reconciliation. The wolf killed in 1904 was no mere animal. Some believed that it was indeed the Volva, and that the power of the Stoneheads had allowed it to return from the dead today. It is impossible to verify anything. The exams disappeared, and with it, the unexplained phenomena ceased. But one question remains. Were these 2 coarse faces carved in stone haunted by a wolfman? And if so, could the Volva ever return? You have just heard some of the strangest and most disturbing stories. Stories from the past and maybe also from the future. Some stories will seem implausible, others may continue to haunt you. But remember one thing, the line between the imaginary and the real is sometimes thinner than you think. If you want more stories like this, or more grounded in the real, support the channel by liking and subscribing. Remember, even normal curiosity can lead to the most terrifying stories.